Let's go back to Siegfried Dehn. So he obviously has some great students. You mentioned Anton Rubinstein, Mikhail Glinka. He had a dispute, or rather, he had somebody, an interlocutor, Adolf Bernhard Marx. First, talk about Adolf Bernhard Marx, because he's in a way quite a heavyweight too. He was very close contemporaries with the Mendelssohn family. He was a contemporary of Beethoven. So tell me a little bit about Marx. And this is not Karl Marx, this is Adolf Bernhard Marx.
Yes, it's not Karl Marx, so we have to be careful.
So we have to be careful, otherwise people would think we're talking about The Economist.
But maybe they are not so far, because also our Adolf Bernhard Marx was very fond of the ideas of revolution. So he also sustained the German Revolution in 1848. And he was a man who was he was a lawyer. This is one part of his life, and he was interested in progress of humanity, in progress of Germany. So he was full of those philosophical, pedagogical ideas. He wanted to make the world and Germany better.
Okay, right. How did he learn music?
So he also had a professional training with a quite famous teacher, Daniel Gottlob Türk. So maybe many of our audience knows Türk by his book about piano playing. And one of his colleagues was Karl Löwe, and another teacher was Karl Friedrich Zelter.
Would it be fair to say that his training was similar to that General Bass line? Maybe he came out of that normal tradition?
I don't think so. I don't think that it was similar, because I guess that with Klein, the teacher of Dehn, there were more connections to France and Italy than in the training of Marx. But for Marx, there were also other things to be against the old tradition. So it has a little bit to do with his, say, ideology. Because for Marx, it was in his time, he observed a kind of fight between the good and the evil. And the good was, of course, the progress, and the good was a kind of a spiritual approach to music. It was the tradition of the big masters, of big German masters, Bach, Beethoven, and Handel. And he was against the old tradition, the ancient music, the ancien régime.
What artists would represent the ancient regime?
For Marx, the ancien régime was in the music were the old Italian masters and the tradition of thorough bass. And this is something we should leave, and we should forget it, and should go to a new world of the spiritual music and the masterwork.
But why would he say that when Bach himself would study neat and thorough bass and CPE Bach, and all these masters knew thorough bass very well?
Yeah, of course, this is a problem, in fact, but I don't know. Either Marx didn't know that, or maybe he didn't want to know that, but this was not a part of his idea. So he said thorough bass is something we have to forget, because thorough bass is something sensual. It sounds a bit crazy for us, but he really said it's something sensual. And it's for sensual music, which has not the same level as the spiritual music of Beethoven and Bach. Of course, but as I said, it's an ideology, it's a construction for him.
Obviously, when you want to replace something, you need to replace it with something. So what kind of music theory was he advancing? If we could get technical, what was different between his music theory and thorough bass?
So he had, of course, a very big idea of a new music theory. He wrote this very big book of Die Lehre von der musikalischen Komposition. So maybe already the title tells us something about this idea. Thorough bass only is a part of music, he would say, Marx, and he wants to teach everything, all parts of composition. So harmony and form and so on, instrumentation, so everything you need to become a composer. And therefore, until today, the so-called Formenlehre of Marx had a great influence until today.
If thorough bass is just a part of it, are we talking about perhaps Roman numerals here, or is that later?
Yeah, no, for Marx wanted to forget thorough bass completely, because thorough bass was a part of the old world. And his approach to harmony is only based on modern methods of fundamental bass, Roman numerals, and so on.
By the way, just really quickly, Roman numerals, who came up with that?
So Roman numerals were used by Vogler. I think he was one of the first theorists who used the Roman numerals for fundamentals. And then, of course, the most important theorist for the Roman numerals was Gottfried Weber.
I was reading your article, and Marx was absolutely savage with thorough bass, and it almost seems like it goes beyond music theory and beyond music education and strikes at that nationalistic idea of identity and that sort of thing. And is that because thorough bass has roots in Italian traditions? Is that how it is?
Maybe also this was a reason that Italian music for him was the ancient music. And he wanted, for us it's a bit difficult to imagine this, but for progressive people in Germany this time, it was a part of being progressive to be natural. Yeah, so to be interested in nationalism and in the big German composers. This was an idea which comes from this time.
And there's some other people you mentioned, like, for instance, Ferdinand Hiller. Could you talk about Ferdinand Hiller and some other kinds of general bass examples and harmony books that were coming around at the time?
Ferdinand Hiller is more on the side of Dehn. So he's a very interesting personality. Hiller had connections to France and to Italy, and he was then director of the Conservatory of Cologne. And he published also a book about harmony. And in this book, we can find, this was a very big surprise when I saw it the first time, many partimenti by Fenaroli and Scarlatti and other old masters. So you see, Ferdinand Hiller, he was very open-minded to the old tradition. And I guess the majority of people were open-minded and they were still interested in the old tradition, because this was what happened in the classrooms.
And so Fenaroli, all this partimenti, so Hiller actually had Italian partimenti with him. Is that the same for Dehn? And does Marx actually mention the word partimenti? Now we can actually get into the reception of partimenti and Fenaroli in Germany.
As far as I know, Marx does not mention partimento. Dehn does mention partimento, and he also uses basso continuo exercises in his Harmonielehre. And this was exactly the thing which was disturbing for Marx. So when Marx was criticizing Dehn, he said, "You are writing a Harmonielehre, but you are only doing thorough bass. So your Harmonielehre is not a real Harmonielehre because you are using basso continuo exercises." But he did this battle on a very philosophical level, because he said, die alte Musiklehre im Streit mit der neuen. Yeah, so the old teaching method fighting with the new teaching method. Was progress against, how could we say, reactionär, to go back.
One of the things that in the article mentioned that partimento was perceived as deficient because it appeared to lack, quote-unquote, chord theory, that kind of vertical looking at chords.
Yeah, so this was the problem which Marx had with thorough bass, I think. This has to do with this old idea of the thorough bass as a skeleton of the composition. So we know that this term, that the thorough bass is the foundation and the skeleton of the composition, goes back to Albrechtsberger, an Austrian theorist in the end of the 18th and at the beginning of the 19th century. He was a teacher of Beethoven. And Marx was criticizing this idea.
No, you mentioned that book that he wrote, the Lehre, the composition book that was 4 volumes or something. And is that... Now, he was one of the founders of the Berlin Stein Conservatory. He was a professor of music at Berlin University. Were these influential positions, and so was his... So did he kind of win the battle, so to speak?
This is difficult to answer. So if we look at the pupils, I think Dehn has won because he had the more successful pupils.
Right. Do we have any of Marx's... Does Marx have any students of note that we know?
Not so many. So of course he had, but not so many as Dehn had. And of course both were rivals. Both were living in Berlin, and But if we look into history and if we go to the 20th century, of course, then Marx had more influence than Dehn later. And as we all know, the tradition of Partimento and Thoroughbase was forgotten for a certain time, and we had to rediscover that.
Is it because his nationalism was a great kind of a flashpoint that people would rally around in a way? I noticed there was quite a bit of nationalism, and so was that starting. So in the sense that Dehn, he was he particularly political in any way when he was arguing? Did they have a correspondence, or was it just one-sided?
So, now, I think Dehn was not political. He was an historian, and I guess he was not so interested in politics. So not in the same intensity as Marx was.